And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, could I forego Thanksgiving dinner with my family if I have a scheduled conjugal visit at the penitentiary? And are figs and pancakes pretty much an idea hatched by your most hated relative and also Satan? And now, the podcast host who only pretends to dislike giant, ostentatious, inflatable turkeys, Pete Dominic.
No, that's not right. I can't go with you on that, Pete. I hate the inflatable lawn ornaments, but I do appreciate that people were putting up their Christmas decorations this weekend. I am allowing for this to occur the week before Thanksgiving. Hey, it was nice weather. People are getting those decorations up. And I am changing. I am evolving. I am open-minded to your Christmas decorations. Hello? But no inflatables, okay? Really, come on. Stop with that. Nonsense. I've got to go on this rant every year in and year out. Don't be that person. Well, I've got an awesome show for you. Maura Quint is back. She went to Portugal on her own for 4 days. We talked about that. And Maura, always great to kick off the week with Maura Mondays, and a new jingle from Pete Co for her as well. And for the first time, a stand-up first-timer joining me is a professor of politics and history and media. Claire Potter of the New School in New York City is brilliant and awesome and a great writer and mind. It was so great to have her on the show for the first time. I think you're really going to like my conversation with Professor Dr. Claire Potter as well. Well, I hope you had a great weekend. Thank you very much for pressing play on today's episode of Stand Up here daily. Planning on posting episodes every day this week, even though it is Thanksgiving week. Millions of Americans will be traveling for Thanksgiving, including my family, headed up to my parents in upstate New York. But the gas prices are going to be something people are going to be commenting about. Last month, their highest level since 2014. The average gallon of gas, $3.41, which is $1.29 more than it was a year ago. Just 32% of Americans plan to drive for Thanksgiving, down from 35% last year at the height of the pandemic, and 65% in 2019, according to a survey from the fuel savings platform Gas Buddy. Are you traveling? Are you getting on the road? You staying home? I hope whatever you're doing it with people that you love. Holiday travel, bringing people together, also helps respiratory viruses circulate easy, and experts are advising that mask mandates stay in place. I've got some news for you on all of that from the expert coming up in the last 24. So let's get to that news segment that you love so much. Hit it, fake producer Keith. All right, let's start off with some
COVID news.
Okay, let's start in Michigan, where apparently COVID-19 surge is straining hospitals there. Many hospitals in Michigan nearing their capacities amid an alarming surge in coronavirus cases. The toll on hospitals compounded by a staffing shortage rippling through the state's healthcare system and a rise in people seeking medical help for issues not related to COVID-19, according to health leaders there. In the country of Austria, they have a major surge and a lockdown as vaccine mandates have divided Austrians while cases are soaring there. Europe experiencing a menacing fourth wave of coronavirus with soaring rates of infection. While Austria may be the first European country to respond with a nationwide lockdown, it may not be the last. And more Asian countries are slowly reopening their borders and welcoming vaccinated travelers. On Monday, Singapore said it would allow back in travelers from 5 more countries, including India and Indonesia, starting later in the month. And Disney puts worker vaccine mandate on pause after Florida now is banning restrictions. So those are a few headlines from your COVID news for today. Now here is Dr. Anthony Fauci talking boosters on CNN State of the Union with Dana Bash.
Absolutely, Dana. Let's make it clear. You know, when there's lack of clarity, people get confused. They're not sure what to do. If you are 18 or older and you've been vaccinated, fully vaccinated with the Moderna or the Pfizer mRNA 6 months or more ago, get a booster. If it's J&J, and it's 2 months ago or more, get a booster. I don't think we should get hung up on should, may. Just go out and get boosted. We know they're safe, and we know they're highly effective in bringing very, very high up the optimization of your protection. So just go ahead and get boosted.
And he really belabored this point. I got boosted, by the way. I've got my booster course, as well as my flu shot. I had my physical on Friday. Here's more from Dr. Fauci.
Now's the time to do it. As we're getting into the holiday season, you want to be fully protected in the sense of getting optimal. I mean, the vaccines themselves clearly are still highly effective, but you want to make sure the durability of that protection is longer. And that's the reason why you get boosted, because we know no vaccine lasts forever. So the protection starts to wane a bit. And that's what the boost is all about. Bottom line, Dana, get boosted.
Get boosted. Hashtag get boosted. Have you gotten boosted yet? Did you get your booster? Go get boosted. Come on, get your booster. They're available to everybody. Today's show is sponsored by The Booster. And what's the best way to celebrate safely this Thanksgiving, Dr. Fauci?
Well, my recommendations to Americans to celebrate safely is get vaccinated as soon as you can. Obviously, if you're not vaccinated, you're in a situation where you're more vulnerable to getting infected. But for the people who are vaccinated, the people who can get boosted, enjoy your holiday season with your family, indoors, grandparents, children. Do it, but be aware that when you are in a situation where you are traveling, for example, and you are in an indoor congregate setting and you don't know the vaccination status of people, you need to wear a mask. But in the family setting, particularly among vaccinated people, enjoy the holiday.
All right, we go from CNN over to CBS, where Face the Nation anchor Margaret Brennan had former FDA chief Scott Gottlieb on, asking him if it's too early to lift mask mandates. He gave Margaret Brennan his answer with his signature electric personality and flair.
So 62 million Americans who are eligible to be vaccinated still aren't. And according to the CDC, 85% of the counties in this country are in substantial or high transmission. So you've already predicted a post-Thanksgiving spike. Is it too early in places like Washington, D.C. to lift mask requirements?
Look, I think local officials need to base the rules on what the local prevalence is. And right now, in some parts of the country, prevalence is very low. When you look at the South and the Southeast, even parts of the tri-state region, the Mid-Atlantic region, I think we need to be mindful that when we lift these restrictions, we may have to re-implement them if things worsen. Right now, we're better in this country than we were a year ago. There were 170,000 cases on a 7-day average. A year from now, a year ago from today, we had about 77,000 people hospitalized. So we're in a better circumstance, but we're probably not as good as we should be, given all the tools we have between the vaccines and the highly effective drugs, and also how much infection we've had in this country and how much immunity is already in place.
And Margaret Brennan also asked Scott Gottlieb about mandates and developments there and what works, what doesn't, an ongoing conversation.
The Labor Department's OSHA division said it's suspending enforcement of that Biden requirement to test or vaccinate business employees. We also saw Disney halt vaccine requirements in the state of Florida after the governor there said businesses can't carry out that kind of mandate. In both cases, you have the government telling businesses what to do. If you're a business owner, if you're an employee, I mean, what should you be doing right now?
Well, look, I think it's not inappropriate for businesses to mandate vaccines, and certain businesses absolutely should be mandating vaccination in their workplaces. Healthcare settings where you can't protect employees with other tools other than to make sure that you can keep the infection out of that setting. So settings where you have a lot of employees working very closely together, it's hard to work in a masked environment in perpetuity. I mean, this is the unfortunate consequence of government officials getting into these private decisions. If we ultimately left these decisions to mandate vaccines up to states, local districts, private businesses, I don't think you'd see this be a political fight at a national level. Now it's become a political fight at a national level, unfortunately. You're going to see some governors trying to position themselves on this issue, like you've seen in Florida. And you're going to see the federal government, the Biden administration, now fighting those states and fighting to implement these OSHA rules. The end result is that I think businesses that were going to move forward on mandates have moved forward, and businesses that are reluctant to do it are probably going to wait in place and see what happens with the outcome of this litigation involving OSHA. By the time this lawsuit ends up getting resolved, probably will be through the surge that we're seeing right now, this Delta surge, and maybe on the back end of the pandemic here.
And Pete Buttigieg made the rounds on some Sunday shows. Here he is on Meet the Press being asked about whether or not vaccine mandates were going to have issue during the busy week of travel. Mayor Pete, take it away. Secretary Pete.
I have seen no indication that vaccine requirements are going to impact travel in any way, certainly in terms of our ability as a federal administration to provide the services that are needed. I can tell you in my agency, we've seen numbers approaching 99% of people have gotten in their information per the requirements. Either they're vaccinated, they're in the process of it, or they've put in a request for an exemption. I expect the numbers are similar across the board.
All right, there you go. There you go. All right, there you go. That is your COVID news update, which I generally do on Mondays, wrapping up some of the headlines and giving you some of the sound. What else have I got for you here on the Monday show? Oh, Joe Biden pardoning the turkeys is kind of funny because he asked them what they had to say and they actually said something. This is an absolutely insanely stupid waste of time and dumb tradition, but I guess some people like it. And, well, here it is.
The power vested in me as President of the United States, I pardon you. I pardon you this Thanksgiving. Go ahead, say something. There you go. Thanks for the pardon. But I also have to pardon.
All right, well, that was pretty ridiculous. Somebody's going to eat those two turkeys at some point. Of course, tons of fallout from the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and that last night there was a horrific situation that took place in Wisconsin, in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I'm not sure at this point if there's any relation to the trial, but a speeding vehicle, I'm sure you know this by now, tore through a parade in the Milwaukee suburb of Waukesha, Wisconsin, killing multiple people and striking more than 20. It is a nightmare scenario, a heartbreaking situation there. The chief of police said person of interest was in custody and that there was no further threat. He said he did not know how many people died. At this point, I'm sure you'll know a lot more details about that horrible situation, so I'm not going to read into it or mention anything more. Also not going to play any of the clips from the Rittenhouse trial or the reaction to it because it's just not mine to cover fairly and robustly the way I'd like to. But I will be talking with folks on the show about it. But in terms of clips and everything, I just can't bring myself to it. It's too enraging, and there's too many details and important ways to look at it. We will keep talking about it, certainly not avoiding it. I just don't have the resources, I think, to cover it. And this horrible situation in Waukesha, I just can't imagine. And hopefully we'll know more soon. Okay, now let's get to some crazy clips of Republicans over the weekend. First, here is Kevin McCarthy on Fox News attacking the military.
When our military is focused on wokeism instead of defeating and winning war and keeping up with China.
Former Republican and Mitt Romney's campaign manager, Stuart Stevens, tweeted about that. Occasionally I look up and I see the GOP as the military-bashing pro-Putin party and think back to all the Republican campaigns we ran accusing the Dems of not supporting the military and being soft on Russia. And it hits me again. It was all a lie. Yeah, well said, Stuart Stevens. How did the Republican Party become the party of Putin? Good question. Well, I don't know why CBS Face the Nation invited Senator Ted Cruz onto the show, but at least when they did, Margaret Brennan asked him or pushed back on his nonsense. Here's Ted Cruz on CBS Face the Nation.
Rather than acknowledge voter fraud is real, it is a problem.
Well, do you have...
And the allegations of voter fraud needed to be examined on the merits.
Okay, Senator, there is no evidence of fraud that would have really drawn the outcome of the election into doubt. You know that. I want to ask you about 2024 and a race...
Voter fraud has been persistent from the very first election.
Are you going to run for president in 2024?
Okay, thank you very much, Senators. Of course he's going to run, Margaret. Of course he is going to run. Is there anybody worse than him in the Senate? Yeah, lots of them. They're all pretty bad, actually, at this point. And speaking of Ted Cruz, over the weekend, At the Hill tweeted that Biden will celebrate Thanksgiving on Nantucket, in Nantucket Island off of Massachusetts. And Ted Cruz quote tweeted that. He wrote, "There once was a man from Nantucket." And this is what CNN's Jim Acosta had to say about that on his show this weekend, which I think just proves that, this was funny, what Jim Acosta said. It was funny, but is this news? Is this journalism? Or is this editorial pithy commentary? Again, funny, but is it the place of the former White House correspondent and now CNN anchor to say this? You tell me.
Cruz tweeted, "There once was a man from Nantucket," which begs the question, is he trolling himself now? Because immediately there were so many renditions of "There once was a man from Nantucket" about Ted Cruz. They were everywhere. And mine goes like this. "There once was a man named Ted. When Texas froze, he fled. He went to Cancun, but came back too soon. Rest in peace, irony, you are dead."
Okay, like I said, that was a clever little limerick, but I felt like when people criticize CNN at this point, it's for moments like that. Well, what do you think? Where are you getting your news from? I'm just playing you some of the audio clips. Of course, a lot of those come from television, but I got a lot more news to get to, and I'm going to wrap this up because almost everything at this point was about Kyle Rittenhouse trial, the horrible situation in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I've got your COVID news covered. So let's get to all the rest of the headlines, rapid fire style, then get on over to those interviews. It's time for the news dump and another great jingle by the great Pete Coe.
New Zealand lady's possum suddenly lost his lunch, chased her owner fleeing in terror for today's news dump.
Oh dear, and that one, of course, ripped from the headlines. Police say that a New Zealand possum held a woman hostage at her home. They say the animal, thought to be either an escaped pet or a juvenile, kept lunging at the woman when she was trying to leave the house. Well, maybe she shouldn't have a pet possum. Officers received a call late on Sunday night from a distressed woman who said a possum was, quote, holding her hostage at her home. When she would exit the house and attempt to reach a car, the possum would charge at her and she would flee inside. So that is so news dump jingle ready. What could be better? All right, well, what else do we have that impacts more people than the possum holding the lady hostage? All right, crazy, scary moment at the Atlanta airport Saturday afternoon when a gunshot caused panic there, sending passengers fleeing and briefly putting a halt to departing flights. The weapon was fired accidentally, apparently, according to officials at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. City police said no one was injured. There's not an active shooter, the Twitter account said. But yeah, people ran out on the tarmac and ran out of the airport, as you can imagine, given all the weird acts of violence that we seem to be hearing about in the news each and every day. Can't blame people for panicking there. But luckily, everything was okay, and it was just an accidental gun firing. Oh, okay. Just accidental. All set then. Well, this is a cool story. The class of U.S. Rhodes Scholars for 2022 included the largest number of women ever selected for the scholarship in 1 year. The Rhodes Trust announced Sunday. Of the 32 students chosen to study at the University of Oxford in England, 22 are women, the Office of the American Secretary of the Trust said in a statement. I made high honor roll in 7th and 8th grade. That's the extent of my academic accolades. Congratulations to all of the Rhodes Scholars for 2022. Let's see. Venezuela voted in regional elections. Bulgarians voted for president in a runoff election. Voters cast ballots in Malaysian state election. And I love this story from my hometown of Syracuse, New York. And this is going to have to be inspiring a news dump jingle, Pico. A cat may be the reason that 3 residents escaped an apartment fire in upstate New York. Residents were asleep when a fire broke out Saturday morning on the first floor of a building in Syracuse. Fire officials said a cat inside the home woke them up and everyone was able to evacuate. According to Syracuse.com, when the fire crews arrived, they were able to knock down the fire in about 20 minutes, and the fire was confined to the building's first floor, but officials said the second floor of the building also had to be evacuated. A cat alerted residents to an apartment fire and may just be the reason that their lives were spared. Amazing story. I got to know more about this cat. News jingle worthy already. And how about this? In a survey of 1,100 Americans to understand how we use our smartphones, 51% female, 49% male responding between the ages of 18 and 68. 90% of us regularly use their phone on the toilet, guilty as charged. Our go-to apps when are bored: number 1, TikTok; 2, Instagram; 3, Reddit; 4, Twitter; and 5, Facebook. 91% admit to looking at their phone while socializing out of boredom. 1 in 3 people have been distracted by phone notifications during sex. Just a few of the findings of this poll. No place is sacred. 40% of adults check their cell phone immediately after making love. More than half say their legs and butt have gone numb from sitting on a toilet for so long while scrolling. A poll done by Solitaire. I don't know how it's pronounced, but I thought it was a pretty interesting find. Here's a weird story out of San Francisco. About 80 people rushed a department store, Nordstrom store, over the weekend and stole merchandise in what authorities are calling an organized theft. Police say they arrested a few people in connection with the incident at the luxury department store, including one person allegedly in possession of a gun. Video of the scene posted to Twitter showed cars blocking the street outside the store as people fled and police making arrests at gunpoint. The mass theft was the latest in a spate of large-scale robberies to hit the Bay Area, from pharmacies to jewelry stores to cannabis dispensaries. Apparently, it's an organized kind of mob of people that all run in and take shit at once. Don't be part of that mob. Just say no. If someone says, hey, we're going to get together a bunch of people, we're going to raid the store and take shit, say, nah, I'm not going to do that. I don't think so. I'm busy. Tell them that you're busy and don't participate in that. Just a little bit of advice from your pal Pete. And finally, I'm just looking at box office numbers over the weekend because Ava and I went and saw Marvel's The Eternals, which came in second place. We liked it. It was long. We like all Marvel things, and frankly, I just like hanging out with her. So if she asked me to see almost any movie, I mean, if she was like, do you want to go see Clifford the Big Red Dog? I was like, can we hang out and eat a bucket of popcorn? Yes, I am in. Anyway, that's what we did. We watched The Eternals. It was great. But the number one at the box office was Ghostbusters Afterlife, which brought in $44 million. What movies or shows did you watch over the weekend? All right, well, that is it for today's news dump. Now it's time to get to my guests. Joining me coming up, it is Monday, so I caught up with Maura Quint for Maura Mondays. But first, I want to introduce you to a brand new guest who's joining me for the first time. I always love to discover new voices and bring them into the conversation. And I was reading a New York Times op-ed, which I actually didn't even get to with her because we talked about so many other things. But I was reading over the weekend an op-ed about Ronald Reagan and his rhetoric and his policies and what it did to Americans' belief about the importance of government for like the last 40 years. But she is a professor of history at the New School, which is a great school here in New York City for social research. She's the co-executive editor of Public Seminar, which is a digital magazine of politics and culture based at the New School. Her research and teaching areas mainly are in United States political history after 1970, the history of gender and sexuality, mass culture, media, and internet studies. And we talked about her new book, Political Junkies, From Talk Radio to Twitter, How Alternative Media Hooked Us on Politics and Stole Our Democracy. I'm very excited to introduce you to Claire Potter for the first time here on the show. You can find her at clairepotter.com, and on Twitter, she is Tenured Radical, at Tenured Radical. Ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with Professor Dr. Claire Potter right now. All right, there she is, Professor Claire Potter, joining me right now. So excited to have you. Big fan of your work. Been reading all about it. You have a PhD, yes?
I do have a PhD in history.
I had a PhD in history yesterday. You might even know him because you guys are maybe in similar lanes. Brian Rosenwald, University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah. I know Brian. He's great.
Yeah, so I asked him, I was like, hey, what do you like? Professor, doctor, Mr. Rosenwald, what do your students call you? And he goes, my students usually call me doctor. And then he pointed to an issue. I thought you and I could jump off. He goes, but there is a kind of issue there where women often don't get that same respect. And I made a pithy sexist joke, which was, well, maybe they should get their PhDs. But of course, he was saying women, professors with PhDs don't and I thought, well, that's interesting. I've got one now who's also a gender studies expert. So what are your thoughts on that? What do your students call you?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Pete.
Of course.
It's really nice to be with you. My students sometimes call me by my first name. I teach at a progressive university, and I actually like to encourage even undergraduates to interact with me as if we're all adults. It gives them practice for the real world. But I would also say that partly I'm able to do that because I'm white. Often women of color find themselves misrecognized in universities,
right,
treated like secretaries. Not that there's anything wrong with being a secretary, but you want to be recognized for your accomplishments. And so I think the title can matter a lot more to people who might otherwise be perceived as less than they are. So, I like my students to call me Claire. I also like them to call me Professor Potter if they're more comfortable with that. My father was a physician, so we're really pretty, there's a boundary in our family between who's a doctor and who isn't.
Is that a thing? Is that an argument? Does it occur?
Yeah. I mean, you're not a doctor.
Yeah.
If somebody comes on an airplane and says, is there a doctor on the airplane? You don't want a PhD in history to respond to that.
Oh, that's how we're different. If I had a PhD in history, I would say I'm a doctor. And
right.
then I would be like, oh, you mean an MD? Oh, I can't help you. But then everybody in the plane would know who I
That's right. Well, I'd love to try doing a tracheotomy with a ballpoint pen, but but I don't think the person who got it would be very good with that. So
wait,
anyway,
hold on. Just real quick. What kind of physician is your dad? I feel like that's going to tell us something about you. I'm going to make assumptions about you as a result.
Internal medicine, gastroenterologist.
Oh, wow. Okay. Grown up where and when?
Philadelphia, actually outside in the suburbs. In the 1960s and 1970s, when the suburbs were really just, totally rocking, not full of people who were fleeing the city as they are now.
We should someday we should talk, or someone should be an expert on like how the suburbs culturally changed from, you're a little older than me, but like 70s, 80s, 90s. You said rockin'. I don't think you were being cynical. Like, it was awesome. Like, I had an awesome childhood myself.
Yeah, no, I did too. And a lot of freedom. I mean, I sort of look at kids today and, they're not allowed to ride their bikes to school. They're not allowed to walk to school. Some school districts actually have laws against children taking themselves to school. I started walking to school when I was 8 years old. My mother put me in charge of a 9-year-old who was much more responsible.
Wow. Hold on. Now I didn't know I was talking to, as we referred to growing up, a walker.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have that? I was a bus. I don't know I rode the bus. There wasn't a name for us. But then there were walkers, and they were a little cooler in my mind because they were local. They were like right near the school. And that was cool. We had to take a bus for 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
That's right. You were in charge of yourself. And it was great, not having to be dependent on your parents. And I think there's an increased dependence on parents for all kinds of reasons nowadays. Yep. But people sort of leave it out that young people are not asked to take full responsibility for themselves until they're much older, sometimes going to college.
I could talk to you about this forever, including like your own personal experience, much less your expertise on it. But just real quick, anecdotally, how often in your walks to school were you approached by a stranger with candy?
Never. Not
we
once.
We were told they were everywhere.
I know, trying to get you to get into cars and look at little puppies.
Oh, no, I just remember walking, from school to what we called church school or catechism. And they'd be like, well, don't talk to any strangers. I'm like, you'll be safe once you get into the Catholic church school. Oh, wait a second.
That's right. The priest will be there to take care of you. Oh, my God, there he is.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, oh my God, I'm already having a good time. I think we should just talk for hours. But I want to talk with you, obviously, about your book and your work and even your Substack, because your commentary on current events is a great new place for me to try to figure out how I feel about a thing that I don't know that much about, and you certainly do, in the context and your experience and your expertise, your scholarship, I think they call it. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, you're at the New School, you're a professor, and I guess the question I want you to answer is kind of to counter a narrative you often hear, criticism of academia is, what do you, Professor Dr. Claire Potter, think? What are you turning out? Like, what are you producing? You go in and you teach and you talk about history and politics and gender studies, but are you actually doing anything good for society? Are you? What happens to the students that you teach? What do they contribute to the world? And is it more than my friends in finance?
Well, that's a really good question. And I actually think I'd like to start by saying I love it when people who go into finance have a good liberal arts education, because I actually think if you are working at high levels in finance, making decisions about the economy, about how to invest, you're making decisions about people's lives. There are people attached to those businesses that you are trying to finance. There are people who are workers. And I like the idea of people who work for banks and other sort of high-level institutions that we think of as more conservative and more sort of middle of the road. I like them thinking about what they're doing in relation to the world they're trying to make. So that's always something I've loved about teaching history and teaching gender studies. I also think that the students who really focus on the liberal arts and go into writing, journalism, other fields, they need to learn how to think critically. And I think one of the toughest things about today's political discourse is that people are so often skating the surface of issues. They're working on surface impressions. They're working on a superficial knowledge. And then, of course, social media allows you to speak with great authority about everything and shout people down who don't agree with you. But I also think part of what I teach is disagreement. And I think one of the difficulties we have in our society today, and you can look at the hullabaloo about critical race theory as a great example, is people don't know how to disagree with each other and actually work their way through to some kind of a consensus or a conclusion about what they want from that confrontation.
Ooh, man, I like your answers to things. Very, so interesting, just like your writing. And so you're often accused, again, usually from the right, but whatever, of having an agenda, especially when it comes to, gender and sex and queer stuff. You have an agenda, and then the other word is you are indoctrinating. Let's make it really hyperbolic. My kids with your agenda. So the question is, what is your agenda and why are you indoctrinating my kids? And also forcing it down their throat is the phrase that I feel like I've never really used that myself in accusing someone. Anyway, what do you say to that kind of criticism when, in fact, it sounds like what you're telling me is you're teaching critical thinking and how to disagree, not an agenda of what you believe?
Right. Well, I think that kind of criticism actually reflects something real about education. I think a lot of parents are very frustrated about what is happening to their kids in school, what they like and don't like about it, and what they can actually do to affect it. And I think one of the things that's really gotten lost, certainly in our contemporary debates about critical race theory and other kinds of indoctrination in schools, is that parents go through well over a decade of watching their children go through high stakes tests, which they have to do very specific curriculum in order to do well in those tests. And I think rather than saying to parents, look, we just don't want to hear from you, and that's what Terry McAuliffe did before he lost the election as governor of Virginia, instead of saying to parents, you don't get to say anything about it, I actually think government, teachers, principals, school boards need to dig a little deeper with parents and find out what they're really upset about. And, one of the things I thought about the woman who got so much press because she was upset at her son reading Beloved, and that her son was freaked out about Beloved and the teacher didn't care and so on. One of the questions I would ask was, well, did the teacher really teach that book well? Because it's a hard book. It's a hard book for anybody to read. If you're going to read something that tries to evoke the world of slavery and what was actually done to Black people in slavery, it's going to be violent and it's going to be difficult to read. And so the question is not, should we be teaching that? I think we should be teaching that. But the question is, how do you train people to teach those things well? And if you're teaching well, you're not indoctrinating people. You are presenting them with a set of challenging ideas, and you're creating an atmosphere within which they can question those ideas, they can dig deeper on those ideas, they can even say things that may seem outrageous to the teacher. And then the teacher has to be able to listen and respond to them and make sure that where that question is going is productive. It doesn't matter whether you disagree with the student or not. What matters is whether that disagreement contributes to a productive classroom atmosphere and the development of that student's intellect.
I really appreciate everything you just said. I would want to just one quick follow-up on that, because I do think it's such a consequential, important issue, and I want to make sure I'm understanding you right. But if the beloved teacher, scenario, I guess my bias would tell me that if a teacher is teaching that book, they probably are sensitive enough to know to tell the students ahead of time. And I would imagine even send a note home to parents. This conversation has bothered me so much. I have teenage daughters in school. I'm at these BOE meetings and trying to have my voice heard and talking about it all the time in public. But I want to put it on the parents. Like, if you didn't get the note that your kid's reading some difficult stuff, to know enough to ask them if they want to talk about it. Like this idea that we're blaming the teacher. If my kid's feeling bad about himself, that, if your kid feels bad about him or herself because they're white, that's your fault. That's not the teacher. That's the parent. And if your kid doesn't feel comfortable with Beloved, that's also your fault. He doesn't have to read the book. You can opt him out, and if not, then you should talk to him about it. You should, by the way, I'd go even further. You know what I do? Because I'm an awesome dad. I read the books with my daughters, the hard ones.
Right. I think that's actually a really good practice. But I would also say that there's something else behind some of these objections to what's being taught in school, which is there's a category of white people that doesn't actually want to think about racism at all. And a cultural atmosphere has been created for such people that says, well, you're right, because if you think about racism, that's racist. If you ever talk about race, that's racist because race doesn't exist. And here's where I actually think critical race theory is very useful, which is Derek Bell and all of the other scholars who developed the field, Kimberly Crenshaw, Maria Matsuda. Part of what they argued is that racism is actually permanent. And they didn't necessarily mean that in an invidious way, but rather to say all of these liberal solutions that presume that racism will disappear if you just have another court decision, if you just have another law, if you just have another sensitivity training, are false. And that what we need to deal with is a world in which racism is permanent, and people need to be able to have those conversations, and they need to be educated to have those conversations.
Geez, that brings up one more question I have to ask you to answer, which is there's this argument that diversity, equity, and inclusion programming at the corporate level or in organizations and schools, et cetera, is well-intentioned. But what it sounds like you might be making the argument, or might be open to this, is without systemic change, you can tell people how to be empathic and teach them how to be sensitive and teach them why systems are the way they are. But unless you make these changes, we're going to continue to have these problems. Am I on to a debate there about DEI versus CRT and what works to spend money to help people in the HR at your corporation understand how not to be an asshole?
Right. Well, I think you're pointing to something very important, which is, first, DEI and CRT are two very separate things. CRT is about an approach to knowledge, an approach to the world. Yeah. DEI is about managing the workplace. And one of the things that I've been thinking about over the past few months, as I've been watching this play out, is DEI is also ass ass covering. And people hire consultants to do it. If a school could actually have those conversations about race on their own, they would have those conversations. And so in a sense,
I have to interrupt you with an anecdote, which is I worked in corporate media forever. At SiriusXM, we had to take a training on sexual harassment. I guess it was, about that. And the dude that was teaching it was from the outside, and I'm a class clown. So I'm there with all my colleagues from every department. And I'm just like kind of making fun of the whole thing. Cause so much of the stuff was like, do we really not know this, and the truth is, a lot of people don't, but still, the whole thing, the guy came from the outside, and it was just kind of surreal and bizarre, and I don't think people took it seriously, and I'm trying to just put a little color to the point you're making in an actual situation. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's what happened.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think part of what's wrong with DEI training is because they're intended to apply to everyone. In some ways, they apply to no one at all. We did ours at the New School. It was an online thing with slides that would sort of tell you a little story. And they were always sort of introducing characters that were counterintuitive. So if a white man was getting harassed for being gay, it was always a black woman who was doing it.
Oh, God.
So they are cartoonish for that exact reason. And I would also say that DEI is something that corporations do to insulate themselves, right? And it's something that schools do to insulate themselves. So while on the one hand, the university I work for is very sincere in its effort to become an anti-racist workplace and an anti-sexist workplace, on the other hand, we have had, terrible incidents. And part of what triggered the online sexual harassment training was something terrible that happened at the school. And the attorney said, if you're not doing sexual harassment trainings, you're legally vulnerable, right? The question of how much people actually learn from them is a conversation that is never really had. But I would also say people learn a lot from literature, which is why I would encourage schools to keep teaching books that make the humanity of people you might not know available to you.
Think that's a great point. And now we're going to play a little thing here on the podcast we call putting her on the spot, which is give me an example of something from literature that illustrates what you're saying, maybe better or as effective as some kind of training would.
Right. So I will take one example that's very familiar from the CRT wars, which is Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye. And, I grew up in segregation in the 1960s and 70s. I went to a private school that was almost exclusively white. I meant well. I had good liberal parents. I didn't think I was a racist. And I remember reading that book when I was 14 or 15 years old. And at the end, of course, the character who has been raped repeatedly looks in the mirror and sees falsely that she has blue eyes. Right. And it's this Black girl who imagines that if she's white, no one will hurt her. And I just remembered reading that. And I had no Black friends at all. And I just remember reading that and learning something that I never could have learned from, say, studying case law in desegregation, Brown v. Board of Education, which Brown v. Board of Education makes the same point about Black children, about how if everything in your world that is good is coded white, you can never really believe that you're an okay person. Right. And Morrison makes that point in such an unbelievably powerful way. And it just struck me. It was transformative. I would say the same thing about Robert Jones's recent novel, The Prophets, that was nominated for a National Book Award. Unfortunately, it didn't win. But it's about people living in slavery in, I think, Mississippi. And the entire story is told from the point of view of enslaved people about how they are experiencing their condition. It tells a story about slavery that most of us know as scholars, but that the vast majority of white people are never going to read that history. If they read this book, they will learn something profound about the violence of slavery and why it should matter to us today.
Robert Jones, The Prophets, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye. Could the same point be made? Because I feel like for me personally, growing up, little boy in a white rural upstate New York town, was films. Can the same point be made of films like Glory or The Color Purple or nowadays the 12 Years a Slave? Couldn't think of it. Films like that, I feel like, have certainly had a huge impact on me, or even like, Selma, things like that, things that you didn't maybe learn about or you forgot about. Same point.
I think the same point absolutely can be made. I think the one thing I would say about films is that they tend to feature one heroic character. So 12 Years a Slave is really very, very focused on one man's story of being unjustly transported into slavery. You have to actually take the conversation one step further to say, actually, through his eyes, we learn something else about slavery. Remember that scene in which he's being tortured by the person who says he owns him, and the other enslaved people on the plantation are walking around just looking at the ground, and nobody can look at him, and nobody will make that eye contact that creates empathy. That's something a lot of film goers might miss about the effects of violence on people. When somebody
my gosh,
else
you're good. That is such a great point, and I so badly did not want to have to read.
Yeah.
But I guess I got to read books because of what a series of great points. But I won't follow up on any to move the interview along, to get to your book, and maybe if time allows, your recent New York Times piece, which is where I found your work. And feel embarrassed that I hadn't discovered it earlier. But there you are online. I think I get this right. And you're reading mentions or something. And someone gives you the virtual, like a GIF with the middle finger to you. And you're just like aghast. You're like, I am a professor. I am happy to talk with you if you disagree. What the hell is happening? And thus is born Political Junkies. How did I do?
You did great. And I think I've really changed over time as we call a netizen. But it's true. I mean, one of the things that people do online that is very easy is to just be reactive, right? Someone comes on and says, you're stupid, or you have no idea what you're talking about, or you're just a dumb liberal or something like that. And you push back at them really hard. And a big turning point for me was when I wrote a piece about the Covington boys. And this was a piece that I wrote for Public Seminar. But you might remember years ago, these white kids who were in a confrontation with a Native American man on the National Mall. And it went viral. And one of them, a kid named Nick, was particularly featured as, a horrible person, a racist, a white supremacist, blah, blah, blah. And I remember watching this whole thing unfold.
Wasn't he wearing a Trump Make America Great Again hat, red hat?
He was, yes. They were all wearing MAGA hats, which, and I remember looking at this and my first response was, wait a second, this kid is a teenager, and all of a sudden he is being swarmed and berated, and there were bomb threats called into the school, and a lot of these kids had to move out of their homes. And, it was actually really horrible. And I remembered watching the whole thing unfold and thinking there is something so deeply wrong with this. And it turned out I was right. It turned out it was a little clip of a much longer video that told a much different story about why these kids ended up in that situation. Anyway, so I wrote a story about it.
They were also all like religious anti-abortion too, which I think
right. They were Catholic kids, which actually there's a national right to life march every year on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And most of the participants are teenagers who are bussed in from Catholic schools.
Great. It's a great trip, a great experience for them. But no, I just jump in only because I want you to solve for X here in your answer, which is I see red hat. I learn he's there as part of that march, so he's anti-abortion, and then he's also confronting a Native American. I don't need any more details. I fucking hate him. Fuck him and fuck everybody who's with him. I've decided now you're going to tell me something about we shouldn't be judging teenagers, and you're going to also tell me context matters. And I don't care because I'm mad. I hate that kid. So
Right. And, what actually sort of made me want to defend him is I went on Facebook and there were all these friends of mine who were college teachers who were saying the worst and most horrible things about him. One guy who, is a great professor at another university said, I just wanted to smash his face with a baseball bat. And, and I was like, wait a second, we teach these kids.
He's 16.
How can you want to take a baseball bat to someone who is younger than the students who come to your class? And so, I wrote this piece saying, first of all, and the news media went off half-cocked, and, 3 or 4 newspapers had to print retractions because they got the story wrong. It turned out that the kid was actually trying to calm his friends and get them to stop taunting the guy. It turned out that the indigenous guy had sought out the confrontation himself, that the kids themselves had never wanted this. It turned out that the indigenous guy was famous for creating weird confrontations with people that put him in the news. But nobody paid attention to that as the story was flying around the internet. So part of the reason
they only paid attention to the details I just laid out. What else? What else? Why are you giving me all the rest of this stuff?
Who needs more? So anyway, so I wrote this thing, and one of the things that happened is all of these conservatives around the country started writing me and saying, thank you so much. Thank you for defending this kid. And I'm so shocked that someone like you would bother to do it. And that was actually a really interesting way of seeing myself, because I don't think of myself as an unfair person. I don't think of myself as someone who is so driven by ideology that I can't dig into a story and try to figure out the truth. And yet I understood that I was perceived that way. So since that moment, I've actually spent a lot of time trying to be in dialogue with conservatives. I grew up around a lot of conservatives, as it sounds like you did as well. So I have the skill set, and I've learned a lot. And I've also learned a lot about the ways in which Americans are being driven apart by media, and what we actually have to do person to person to close that breach so we can move forward as a country.
Well, I'd love to have you and your favorite conservative on to discuss that, and I'll just sit back and prod you every once in a while, and then broadcast the conversation. So, how does that, how do we lead then into the book? Because Political Junkies, is a real contextual look at the history of this country and media and alternative media, which certainly leads into and talks about what we're talking about now. But it is the point, and maybe we start at the end. I mean, where are we at right now? And then maybe we can go a little further back and talk about all the history. I think that might be interesting to start here. Like right now, we are in silos. We are in lanes. We got our favorite websites, our favorite Substacks, podcasts, YouTubes, and they are confirming our bias, including myself. I too have started to think. I want to reach out to a lot of people and talk to people, normal folks, as well as experts that I disagree with. So where are we right now?
Well, right now, we're in a place in which the media, as it's constructed, rewards people for being extreme. And so on the one hand, we have media habits that have been ingrained over a long period of time, as I show in Political Junkies, that alternative media has always been partisan media. It has always been the place where people create new things because they're not being heard in the mainstream, whether they're radicals or conservatives. And one of the things I wanted to show in that book is people talk a lot about conservative media as the driver for that. It has also been liberal alternative media that has been the driver for that.
How dare you, Dr. Potter? Who would? I feel like the most obvious example, right? Top one that really broke through, by the way, was Olbermann. But go ahead and make your point, and then if you want a specific example.
For example, I would one specific example is Izzy Stone's I F. Stone's Weekly, which was a newsletter in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And, I F. Stone couldn't get a job because he had been blacklisted by every newspaper in the United States. So he decides to start a newsletter that is only for the people who are interested in him. He'd been a columnist for decades, And he sends out 70,000 flyers and says, I'm starting my own newsletter. It will be written just for you. And people start sending in $5 bills. He instantly is able to start up this publication for people who care about him. Now, there are a couple, for example, J. Edgar Hoover subscribes to it because he wants to keep an eye on I.F. Stone. So there are some conservatives who are getting it, but mostly it's liberal and radical people, progressives, who are subscribing it. So there's your first filter bubble. Similarly, if you look at William F. Buckley's National Review, it's for conservatives. It's not for liberals, right? So you've got it from print to talk radio, to the internet. There's this sort of increasing capacity to thrive and actually make money off of creating filter bubbles. Now, I would say politicians are the ones that are most rewarded for being extreme. So if you see someone like Paul Gosar or Ilhan Omar, and two very, very different kinds of politicians, getting out there in public and saying something that's really on the edge of what everybody's thinking to, as they say, push the Overton window, right? The Overton window is what is acceptable, right? And what alternative media does is expand that window and make things that were previously unacceptable acceptable, like making a video saying, you want to assassinate one of your colleagues in Congress.
I mean, when do we get to full Grand Wizard clan robes on the House floor and an AR-15 and maybe a tiki torch? Are we almost there? Is that?
Well, we've had Congress people who have been stopped trying to bring weapons.
Right. And they're pissed. I mean, they're outspoken. They're mad that they can't. I mean, just the fact that we're arguing about.
Right. But, this isn't the first time. I mean, back before the Civil War, as the tensions that produced the Civil War were becoming more and more extreme on the Senate floor, Charles Sumner was beaten so badly. He was a senator. He was beaten so badly with a cane by another senator that he didn't return to the Senate for a year, right? So there are reasons we don't allow Congress to arm itself. But I think, we are, again, seeing a moment, as we did before the Civil War, in which more extreme sentiments are profitable.
I just want to say,
for politicians.
I want to be transparent with folks listening and you that when you told that story, I did imagine, you can't laugh at this, it could put you in trouble. I did imagine Congressman Matt Gaetz having the snot kicked out of him. And I think that says something, about me paying close attention to the players and starting to dehumanize people, starting to be okay with, at least in my own brain, violent imagery. I don't know what that says about me. Probably that I need work, obviously, but I mean the point is that's really where we're at in a huge way. It's just okay. It's acceptable. You are my enemy.
Right. I think that's right, and I think it actually does something else. Right. If we're thinking about Matt Gaetz as, someone who deserves to be beaten up, if we're thinking about Matt Gaetz as a Nazi or circulating memes of him in a brown shirt or a Klan robe or something like that, what we're not doing? We're not paying attention to the fact that the man is under investigation for transporting underage girls across state lines, which is a real problem. We're not looking at where he's getting his campaign money. We're not even looking at whether that's legal or not. Right. So there's a whole set of things. I mean, it's like what's going on with the Steele dossier nowadays is conservatives are now saying, well, because the Steele dossier was a fraud, because it was misreported, because it created a witch hunt, there is no connection between Trump and Russia. And actually, that's not true.
Right.
There are big connections between Trump and Russia. And that might have been the purpose of the Steele dossier from the get-go as a piece of disinformation to create something sensational that obscured the more mundane, more boring laws that were being broken.
I think you have to go. Do you?
I do. I have to go very soon, but I have time for one more question if you have a closer.
Well, why don't you tease your book as opposed to going to this New York Times piece? I'll link to that. Really, really important. But I think that your book is so good, and I also want people to buy it. So Political Junkies, From Talk Radio to Twitter, How Alternative Media Hooked Us on Politics and Broke Our Democracy. What else do you want to tell us that's in this, and why people will find it so interesting and important?
So part of what I want people to learn from this book, Political Junkies, is that over a period of decades, politics has become entertainment. And we have become involved in politics as if it was a game. You know, I have some conservative correspondents who are constantly writing me and sort of gaming out, you know, Biden will be declared senile, and then Harris will become president, and then she will be impeached by a new Republican majority, and this will happen, and this will happen. And it's not even serious, but it's like entertainment for them to figure out how the Democrats will be humiliated. And that's really different from citizen engagement. And I want people to understand that this didn't just happen with the internet. This is a long-term process by which we have all been trained by newsletters, by radio. Talk radio was a big player in this process, by television. We were all trained to receive the internet in the way that we have received and used it. And so all of us as citizens need to be more thoughtful, not necessarily about our media diet. You can watch and listen to whatever you want, but you have to remain tethered to the real world. And that doing that requires engaging with media that are actually substantive.
Holy shit, Claire Potter. You made my day. I mean, I'm so excited to have you on and to discover your work. And I can promise you now, listeners are going to love this conversation and want more. So please come back soon. You said before we started that you would, and we hadn't even done the conversation. So I guess, will you join us again? How did you feel about that?
I will totally come on again. I've really enjoyed this, Pete, and I thank you for having me on, and I'd be delighted to come back.
I also have a live event every week, and a whole, usually 50, a lot more would show up if we said you were going to come and be our professor. So if you want to grab a drink and hang out one Thursday night, we'd love to fire questions at you. Awesome. Thank you.
I would be thrilled.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Pete, and I'll see you soon.
There you go, Professor Dr. Claire Potter on Twitter at Tenured Radical. Now, she's never been on the show, so you got to go let her know you appreciate her joining me today for the first time. And check out that book. So good. Political Junkies, From Talk Radio to Twitter, How Alternative Media Hooked Us on Politics and Broke Our Democracy. It came out last year, and you should order it from your local independent bookstore. How about that? Really enjoyed her. I'd love to know what you think of my conversation with her, and hopefully you learned something. I certainly did. All right. Well, now it's time to talk to Maura Quint. She is on Twitter at Behind Your Back, where she is prolific, and people love her on Twitter. If you're not following her, you're definitely missing out. Her day job is as a campaign director for Americans for Tax Fairness, former co-founder or founder of taxtherich.org, but check her out now at americansfortaxfairness.org. She's been a contributor to The Onion and McSweeney's and The New Yorker. Very, very funny, very smart. I love kicking off the week with her. She just got back from a solo trip to Portugal, where she went and had a great time. We talk a little bit about that as well. Here we go. It's time for Maura Mondays, and let's get it started. All right, here we go with the brand new jingle for Maura from Pete Coe. He rewrote it, and it's even more upbeat than the last one. Let's listen, Maura.
When regressive taxation has gone too far and your Bloody Mary's just not up to par, it's Maura Mondays.
I think he's got
it's amazing.
I think he's nailing you.
He really is. I'm a little bit, I'm overwhelmed because it's fantastic. And also, is he in my house? Because I had such a failure of a Bloody Mary the other day, and it bugged me. It really did. It was not up to par, and I don't know how he knew that. I'm a little worried.
Oh, that's hilarious. You tried to make your own, and it didn't work?
Yeah. Well, I was out of olives, and I didn't know that. And olive juice is just so key, to the point where I went to the grocery store today and I bought olives just in case I might need to make a Bloody Mary at some point.
When do you make a Bloody Mary? I feel like anytime after like lunch seems almost like it doesn't seem like an evening drink. I don't think I've ever had one.
No,
such a
it's
brunch.
not an evening drink.
Yeah.
But like, I think, up until the twilight hours, you're fine. You can have one in the afternoon.
All right.
Just not evening.
Well, I thought you were referring to a Bloody Mary that you had at one of the many airports that you were in, because Maura's just back from an overseas trip. You went to Portugal on your own, which is super impressive and exciting. And so I thought maybe you had a Bloody Mary at some point there. How was your trip? Welcome home.
Thank you. It was great. It was a really quick trip. I was only there for a couple of days, but I hadn't left the country in like a decade. So it was just really fun to get to go somewhere. I had a great time. I almost didn't make it back, but otherwise had a great time.
Well, I want to hear how that happened. But before that, I remember you told me at one point that you had made kind of a commitment to yourself to try to leave the country at least once every year, go somewhere foreign once a year. How well did that go? Where have you been? Where have you traveled in the world?
I mean, that worked well for a while. And then I did this thing like I had kids, and then that just really screwed that whole deal up. But I'm trying to get back on board with it now. I haven't been that many places, but I have been more places than most people, I suppose. It's something that I prioritize. So I don't, all of my clothes have holes in them. My car is very, very old. I don't purchase a lot of things. I just sort of save up till when I can buy another plane ticket somewhere. So
because you would rather invest in memories than things.
Yes.
Experiences.
Oh, you said it in such a lovely sort of wine mom kind of way. Yes, that's it. I just want to purchase the memories, Pete.
Well,
that's what matters. No, yeah, it's true.
I mean, I suppose if we had, unlimited money, we'd probably have nice things and great experiences in trips. But most people, the vast majority of people, don't have unlimited money and have to make certain choices as to what their priorities are and to what makes them happy. And you're happier with a great trip to Portugal than a new sweater.
I am. They don't tend to cost about the same, but yes, I am much, much happier with the nice trip to Portugal. The nice trip anywhere. Why did
you almost not make it home?
Oh, I don't know if you know this, but there's a pandemic happening. I just found out. I was traveling back. All right, wait. I'll back up for a second. I was traveling there. I was very on top of it. I felt so good about myself. I researched what you need to be able to travel internationally and was like, all right, well, I had all my stuff, lined up. I had my Vax card. I got a booster shot. I found paperwork I was supposed to fill out to get into Spain because that's where my connection was, in Portugal. And I filled it all out. I filled it out online, forwarded myself the little attachment so it was on my phone. And then I went to a printer and printed it on a piece of paper, like I was living in 1993. I got that in my hand and had it with me. And I felt really, really good about it. And then I had to come back to the United States. And it wasn't as straightforward as Spain and Portugal was in terms of what you need. But they said you needed this piece of paper. All the other countries let me do this online. The US was like, no, you have to print it. But at this point, I was at an Airbnb in Portugal, so I couldn't print it. So I was like, all right, hopefully they'll just have the form at the airport and I can fill it out there. I flew from Portugal to Spain. I had an hour and a half connection. I went out through customs, got back in, and almost was going to just sort of bum around the airport. But then I remembered this piece of paper and was like, I should go to the gate, make sure, see if they have this piece of paper for me to fill out at the gate before I get cozy somewhere else. I went to the gate. They looked at my passport. They looked at my boarding ticket. They looked at my Vax card and they said, okay, where's your negative COVID test? And I said, my what? And they're like, yeah, no, you can't travel unless you've had a negative COVID test in the last 24 hours. Which I didn't see anywhere. I looked at all the stupid paperwork. Wow. So I was like, how do I get one? And they're like, I don't know. I think there's a clinic somewhere. I ended up running around the airport like a crazy person. I had to go in and out. My passport, they stamp your passport every time you enter, go through customs, has 8 stamps in it, even though I just went through one country because I kept having to go back through customs over and over because was the clinic on this side or that side. And I was running around and finally found this clinic. Had to wait in this long line to get this rapid COVID test and then run back in through the gates. I like, it was really cool because I was, I had my steps counting on my phone and I like racked up so many steps. I was like, yes. But I got to the gate with like 3 minutes to spare before they were closing the doors.
Wow.
With my little negative, like rapid test COVID test that I paid a stupid amount of money for, that I was really frustrating. And they like scanned my boarding pass and a big red X came up and it said, "Do not board." I was like, God damn it. And then they had a whole conversation over my head in Spanish and eventually just said, fine. I got on the plane.
Wow.
But it was like, skin of my teeth.
That's crazy because you're getting a call that's them.
I know. They heard me. I have no idea. I didn't even know what the number was.
To come back to customs. No, I mean, like, I don't know. It's so frustrating.
All right. This is annoying. I don't have any idea.
It's got to be. It's so frustrating to travel now because of that. I mean, it's when we went to Mexico this summer, as thank God Val was on top of everything, and even then we missed a couple things, and it's super confusing. But did it make you feel like, wow, everybody else figured this out, but I somehow hadn't too? Yeah.
Yes, everyone else seemed to figure. How did everyone else make it on? And they saw this, and they knew they had to. Yes, that's exactly how I felt. I've never felt so. So much.
And you're
the
a
outsider.
smart person. That makes me feel better, actually, that you got confused about it.
I'm a smart person. That's what I was thinking the whole time too. I'm like, I'm a smart person. How the hell did you all do this? Like, is everybody? I guess I'm not as smart as I thought I was.
How was your trip? I know you caused an international incident by pulling an emergency lever in a public transportation.
Almost caused an international incident. Let's not exaggerate. I mean, almost. Yes. I accidentally pushed the emergency button in a train station that set off sirens throughout the entire goddamn station, and everything had to freeze. And I walked out of the place while the room was frozen.
Is it true that you just ran out like Jason Bourne and changed your jacket?
Yes, I absolutely did. I blended in with the crowd in a crosswalk and like took my coat off and put a scarf on. Like that was fooling anyone. Like they weren't going to know that was the
it was. They didn't catch you. They never caught you.
Girl.
they
didn't catch me. I don't think they were motivated enough to catch me. I think they could have. I think it was one of those moments. Like, look, everybody has a moment in their job where they're like, I could do this. I could step up and do it, but how much do I care? And I think that was for these security guards just a moment of like, so much paperwork.
Why Portugal?
Portugal was an accident. I booked a ticket to Morocco, and I only booked a ticket to Morocco because I found a really cheap ticket, like a ridiculous, stupid fare that was like less than half of what a normal fare would be. And I was like, great, it's a cheap ticket. I'm going someplace that is, relatively inexpensive for Americans to travel. So perfect. And then a month later, I got an email just being like, we've canceled your connection because we're no longer going to fly there. You now have a flight to Spain, which is fine, but I didn't really want to go to Spain. So I just called up the airline and I was like, I see you also fly to Portugal. Can you just send me to Portugal instead? And they said, yeah, sure. So that was it. That's the why.
That's interesting. You're very spontaneous and low maintenance in your travel. You just decided that you'd go to Portugal. And so how was it? What were the differences between, what do you notice differently in terms of whether it be capitalism or COVID? What'd you notice in Portugal that was?
No one had to be reminded to put on a mask. Every place I've been in the States, like if I'm on a train in Amtrak, oh my gosh, I took a train to go to New York for an event. And I mean, the conductor was like getting pissy over the mic, just being like, you will be thrown off of this train if you don't pull your mask up. Like just really, really aggressive, which was fine and fair. I didn't mind it. But no one at any point needed to be reminded to wear a mask in a public place in Portugal. That was just a given. Everybody just wore their masks. It wasn't a fight or any sort of thing like that. That was the first thing that I noticed.
Yeah.
Otherwise people are kind of people everywhere, but they had better food. So
any airplane story? I mean, I know you're low on sleep. Did you really say, you said you were awake for 24 hours, you told me, is that right?
Yeah. Because I don't think
I've ever done that
really, really
in my life.
Oh, unfortunately, I've done it a couple of times. It's not fun. I wouldn't recommend it.
I cannot do it.
But if you like to travel, but you don't have a lot of money, that means you travel in cheap ways. And cheap ways usually aren't the most like direct or straightforward or easy. Right. And so I had to drive to New York to, for this particular flight. So it was just like, I woke up and had to take a subway to get to the plane, to get to the other plane, to get to, a parking thing that was a ways away to drive myself home. And then, so it was like 24 hours. It was 24 hours I was awake. And of those, I was commuting for 21 hours straight.
God. Worth it?
Yeah. I'm a little wiped. Yeah, absolutely. I'd do it again in a second.
Oh, good.
I'll do it tomorrow.
Oh,
while exhausted. I love it. It's so fun.
Did you meet anybody cool? Any interesting? Any problems? Did you have any? Did you brawl with anybody on the airplane?
I didn't brawl with anyone. The airplane was very low key and quiet. No one was heading to Europe. It was an empty plane. Everybody was coming to America. It was a very full plane. But I basically didn't talk to anyone for the entirety of the time. I just wasn't I was just walking around sort of on my own. The only time I talked to anyone was the last night that I was there. I was wandering out. It was Thursday night, so it was kind of a party night. And there was this stretch of like a street or so that was just full of bars, and there were tons of people in these it's beautiful old European city and cobblestones and like narrow ways and stuff. And then just all these fucking drunk people spilling out of bars, which was fun. And the one bar had a band inside. It was a small bar, but they were pretty good. I was enjoying listening to them. I went up, and this guy started trying to talk to me, and I was trying to get a drink at the bar, and he bought the drink for me, which was nice. And but then he started talking to me, and it was fine. It was a very pleasant conversation. It wasn't like he didn't say anything problematic or annoying, but it did kind of. I basically got halfway through my drink, and in talking to him, and I started to like go, all right, this conversation is starting to turn a little bit. Like he's definitely hitting on me a bit more, and I don't know him, and I'm by myself in a foreign place. I don't even really know where I am. And I just realized I
have to go home with this guy.
I have to go home. Like I have to leave now, because if I stay, he's going to kind of keep upping the ante here a little bit, and I'm going to have to get myself out of this somehow, because I don't want to fuck this guy. And that actually kind of annoyed me a little bit, just because I just hadn't happened to me in a while. Like it's a pandemic, and I'm older and stuff, so I don't get hit on quite as much. But just that moment of like, it would have been fun to hang out and listen to that band. Like I was enjoying it, but for my own well-being and safety, I couldn't stay there anymore, because I didn't know where this would go, and I didn't know this guy, and I couldn't have someone like trying to follow me through the streets of Lisbon to like where I was staying, like I just didn't know. And that was a little bit of a bummer. It was one of those like, oh, right. Yeah, I'm a woman. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I've never had that happen.
Yeah.
He was a Portuguese guy, or?
No, I think he was Dutch.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, that should have been your first warning sign right there.
I mean, I guess so. He didn't get to that part right away, so I didn't know to throw the drink immediately. I had to hold on to it.
I don't know why I just disparaged Dutchmen, but
I think because it's like pick a nation that seemingly is less threatening.
Yeah,
like the Netherlands. It's the Netherlands. Yeah. Nether is right there in the name. It's just like,
yeah. Well, it's an interesting person who does that, who travels alone overseas. It's at this point in your life, I admired you for doing it. I thought that was awesome. I'm jealous, and I'm sure a lot of other people listening are as well. So good for you. It must have been good to, though, get back to your kids, and most importantly, to the United States of America. We passed the Build Back Better bill out of the House. It's exciting. And then this kid, the vigilante kid, got off.
Yeah, Rittenhouse. Yeah, I mean, we all knew it was coming, of course, but it's always frustrating to have to see how incredibly broken our systems are, which we have to see on a basically daily basis or experience for ourselves. But, every time it becomes sort of a national news story, it just, I think, I don't know, it brings up that sting really intensely, even if you were already feeling it at sort of a lower hum level all the time.
Yeah, I mean, this is a frustrating situation for so many different reasons, but I haven't really talked about it that much on the podcast, and I kind of like don't want to because it's an individual legal case, and I didn't pay attention on the whole case. But the one thing that I just can't quite get over, and the thing that's increasingly upsetting, is these stand your ground laws and these self-defense arguments, which make things like this potentially legal to do. I can understand anybody, using self-defense, certainly at their home or if they were somehow attacked. But this was a tough situation to make that case. I mean, dude, got a ride from his mom with his gun. He went into harm's way and then claims self-defense. But that's the one thing that I feel like, I mean, you just got back from Portugal, and I think the rest of the world is looking at it as good. What kind of laws do you have that actually what he did is not necessarily illegal? You can, and you've seen this, obviously you saw this with Trayvon Martin, and if you're paying attention to the Ahmaud Arbery case, like self-defense, stand your ground. That's America. And like 30 states have those laws. That to me is the one thing that I can't stop thinking about.
Yeah, no, it's very frustrating, the entire situation, and very upsetting. And I mean, like, I haven't looked into it that much either, but, the problem, of course, with the stand your ground and the self-defense laws isn't necessarily that they exist, although, I'm not a legal scholar, so maybe that is part of the problem, but it's the way in which they are not uniformly enforced, and that they are laws that protect certain types of people and do not protect others. It's not a defense that everyone has access to, and that's a fundamental problem.
Yeah, overwhelmingly, everybody was saying if this were a black kid, it would be a different story, and it's who's arguing with that, really? People get tired of that kind of comment or a comparison or defense. If it was a black person, I even saw certain cynical people saying, "Oh, wait for the if it was a black person" comments. Well, yeah, they're always going to come because that's the case in America. You see it every day.
Right. Yeah. No, they'll stop coming the moment we have two different legal systems in place that treat people differently. Of course. Yeah. No, it's infuriating. But it is also not surprising and not rare either, which is also very frustrating. I think anyone watching, like the judge was really, that was again, frustrating. I don't know what word, I mean, and I was watching, I didn't dig too deep in it. I was listening to some other people I knew who are lawyers and whatnot, even saying at points, well, it's that, yes, he's self-aggrandizing. He's obviously a terrible person, but what he's saying here is not, I don't know, that we're kind of like coming up with reasoning and rationale for the way that he was handling it from a legal perspective. But fundamentally, it was just kind of there's no easy answer. Like I know a lot of people were kind of like giving, I forget which lawmaker was just like, this is why we have to vote, which seems very hollow and unhelpful in this moment. And at the same time, that was sort of a thing that kept striking me. It was just like, oh, Jesus Christ, these judges that we have instated across the country.
Yeah.
Man, we gotta get rid of them. We gotta change this somehow. And that's
you gotta organize and start at the local level for sure. This guy could be recalled too. That's the judge clearly put his finger on the scales from the beginning. I think
he knew what he wanted the outcome to be without question. I mean, we all did. Like it was a gross thing to watch. Definitely. I mean, at this point, like the only thing I can say is like, at least we got to watch it. Geez, at least we still have like a system where these things, have some visibility and transparency and aren't happening entirely behind closed doors, and we don't even know what's going on. That's like all I can say. That's good here. Yeah. But
the other thing is when they televise it, the judges and sometimes the lawyers tend to want to be stars themselves, want it to be about them. That certainly seemed to be the case with this Ichabod Crane of a judge.
And why wouldn't they? Because like they get rewarded so handsomely. Yep. I mean, they're all probably, I'm sure he's gotten some sort of offer from OAN or whatever, you know? He can be the next Judge Genie or whatever.
Judge Genie.
I mean, she really struck gold, didn't she? Like, what was the path for that woman in her life? Like, how did she wind up with that? that's just, she got so fucking lucky.
I don't know. It's a great question.
She's just like one of a million like drunk, crazy country club, ladies. But she's the one who got the show. She
is a walking parody. It's too easy to make fun of her. So what about the House passed the Build Back Better bill? That was a pretty big deal. How closely are you watching this, given your role in at your organization? And do you think all eyes on the Senate now, right?
Yeah, although not likely for another couple of weeks. I think they're not doing anything this next week because it's Thanksgiving. But yes, then it goes to the Senate, and we get to really, go head to head and exchange blows with Manchin and Sinema up close. So that should be really fun. No, I mean, it's great that it passed the House. That was nice to see. I mean, it was a negotiated bill, which means there's things that people want in it that did not end up being in that bill. But we're now in a place where the Senate can change it however the Senate wants.
Right.
So we don't have really the final outcome of what's necessarily going to be in this whole package. And that's good and bad. On the good side, it gives us hope that some of the stuff that got cut out of it could potentially find its way back in. On the bad side, of course, some of the stuff that's in there now could slip and fall. So there's a lot of organizing and work to be done over the course of the holidays because, that's what everybody wants to do. Call their senators all holiday.
Right.
Although, honestly, what else are you doing on Thanksgiving? You're probably trying to escape a lot of family anyway. Might as well just I'm sorry. I got a really important call here. I got to go call my senator.
Well, speaking of which, brings me to a final subject I wanted to talk with you about. What are your feelings? What are your thoughts about this holiday? What are your plans? Are you anticipating? Do you have the COVID issues? I feel like there's a listener reached out to me and said he was really dreading going to visit his in-laws in Florida for Thanksgiving because they're not vaccinated and they're crazy anti-vaxxers and they're Trumpers and he just can't stand being around them. And then he texted me 2 days ago because my sister-in-law got COVID and we're not going. Yay. I mean, that certainly is the case with a lot of people having to get together with their family. Now we are more divided than ever before on some fundamental issues that you just can't get around because you used to be able to hide your feelings and just ignore them.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're not vaccinated or if you're coughing or if you're whatever it is, I mean, we're in a different time. How are you feeling? What's your plan?
Well, I mean, my family, Thanksgiving is a big holiday in my family. My dad is one of 6 kids. And it's also just my family is very sort of open doors and generous and just the more the merrier. I mean, my dad, I remember as a kid, he went out to go buy a newspaper the morning of Thanksgiving and, he starts talking up the clerk who sold him the newspaper and, the guy didn't have any place to go. So the newspaper clerk's coming over for Thanksgiving. It's that was the sort of household that I grew up in.
I love it.
Yeah. Just huge, lots of people, very, very open and very welcoming. And very fun. And this was the biggest holiday for us.
Turns out that guy assaulted a member of your family and it really ruined the day. But, he had good intentions.
No, so far everybody's just been really nice up until this year. This is the pivotal year. I mean, the whole thing's being so divided. What you said was absolutely right. You can't hide it anymore. So, half my family is right and right, on the right, and they've only gone further on the right. And a couple of my sister-in-law and my cousin both had babies. There's, a bunch of kids who are hadn't yet to be able to be vaccinated and stuff. And my mother decided to send an email to everyone saying that my mother was very nervous about this and she workshopped it. She sent it to me, she sent it to my dad. She was very, very concerned that she do this right. And it was a very lovely, welcoming, I can't, happy to be able to have Thanksgiving again this year and have everyone back. Just because we have young children and, we only want to welcome people who've been vaccinated this year because, we're still in a pandemic and being cautious. And my cousin wrote back a very angry, oh, so you're running a fascist dictatorship where, and just went off, seriously, went off.
No.
Which, yeah. And then her mom, my aunt,
is your mom a fascist, though?
What?
Is your mom a fascist dictator?
I mean, not in that way. Like, you know, if you're talking about like the color scheme of pillows, yeah, she absolutely is. But like, this is like a little outside of her scope of her dictatorship, I would say.
Brutal.
Yeah, no, my mother was crushed. I mean, she was so upset. She was really, really hurt, really, really upset. Because of course, even like from a sort of, you know, unhinged psycho, we're not getting vaccinated perspective, there was still a way to even say it with some kindness of just like, well, you know, we respect that that's what you believe, but obviously we disagree, so we won't be seeing you this year. Like there were ways to say it that weren't so incendiary and weren't so aggressive and attacky. And yeah, so like, you know, a bunch of the family will not be coming. They won't be there this year. And I mean, to me, like, fuck them. I never want to fucking see them again. Like, you know, I welcome the opportunity to never have to see these fucking assholes again. I mean, to me, it's just so utterly disgusting. Again, not the fact that they got sucked into the whole right-wing cult is infuriating, and it made me really angry and made me really dislike them. And I, you know, had conversations and have had conversations with them trying to like push them out of this cultish bubble. But this sort of the way that they responded and attacked my mom, to me, just like, okay, well, you're dead to me. Fuck you.
Right.
Like,
right.
That's just so, it was just an unnecessary additional element of like, all right, look, I was trying to even keep talking to you and to keep like, I mean, I wasn't talking to them, don't get me wrong, but like, if I was in a family setting, I would try to like extend an arm. I would even like, I was trying to challenge their views and their perspectives, not again in an angry way, but just in a like, let's not ignore it. Let's engage it. Let's, you know, like, you know, talk to your psycho family and like try and keep trying to get them out. But this was very much like no, cut the line, let them go. I don't
blame you. And I think, you know, you can, it's just so hard. Just so much you can do, but this is, you know, you're certainly not alone. People all over the country. That's why I'm glad I asked you and you shared that. I appreciate it because it is so common across the country right now that people are just cutting each other off over, you know, the simple threshold of being vaccinated or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's look, very well. I'm sure there are individuals for whom this is the only thing, right? Like they're otherwise aligned. You know, anti-vaxxers are not all of one type, so they could be people that maybe you didn't have previous, you know, problems with, and this is the thing. But I think a lot of anti-vaxxers, you know, fall in that sort of Trump MAGA world. And so this is just sort of a like straw on the camel's back. You know, there was obviously generally for a lot of these building up of sentiments that were unacceptable or beliefs that were intolerable. And so now it's just a cleaner kind of way to be like, oh, okay, well, you know, I can keep battling whatever the fuck is wrong in your brain and the way that you're thinking about the world. And I can keep trying in that way. But now you're just trying to get killed or kill people. Like, so I don't need to, now it's in the world of the physical and immediate. And I have no space for that. So get the fuck out.
Yep. Well, you're certainly not alone with that. Are you looking forward to anything about Thanksgiving? Do you make anything? Is there a Maura Quint dish? What are you known for?
I'm known for being the person who says there's no vegetables here. So I need to or that's not true because there's always vegetables, but like it always made me crazy that there was not like some sort of fresh, light sort of vegetable. So everyone was like, well, fine, you deal with it. So I make a salad. So that there's something that's green and light and healthy and that hasn't been like, you know, that doesn't have cream on it or breadcrumbs or whatever.
You're the salad lady.
I'm the salad lady. And you know what? It sounds really sad. And everyone fucking eats that salad, though, man. They love it. They're happy it's
from
there.
what I know of you and salad, you usually destroy a salad by putting strawberries and walnuts on it. Is that going to be the case here?
Okay, so the salad that I've been making that people really like is kale. You're going to love this. Wait, you ready? No, it's kale and it's pomegranate. What are the little seeds in pomegranates called? I forget the word. And walnut. And some, no, it's stout. Oh, you're making a face. Everyone can't see you make that face, but they should know you're making it.
Oh my God.
It's a delicious salad. It's beautiful.
I mean, I dare you to post a picture of your salad on Twitter and ask people what they think.
First of all, I have before, so like I can do it again. Sure, yeah, no problem. And what they think is it's awesome, and that you're
kale,
a crazy person.
Walnut, pomegranate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful too because pomegranate pearls are so like iridescent and pretty.
All right, listen, I gotta go.
It's so lovely, and then they explode in your mouth in that really refreshing, tart, crisp kind of way. Oh, it's just
dress it up however you want.
I am, and I do, and you know, I'm gonna show up at your door with a salad. Is what I'm gonna do. Screw my family plans. That's done. That's over. That's not interesting. I'm driving the 3-4 hour? How far away from you?
If you come that far with a salad, I will eat it. I would feel bad.
There you go. That's
you came
what's
all the way
happening
here
now.
with your pomegranate salad.
I'm just like going to rage drive to your house, just like gripping the wheel the whole time. My knuckles turning white.
Just throw it at my face and then leave.
Just mumbling like absolutely
it sounds expensive.
incoherently.
Sounds like a rich person salad.
It does sound like a rich person salad because it is. I mean,
I hope you have a great time with the people that you love, as well as your favorite dish there and other things. And
what are you doing? Thank you. Sorry, I just realized I was being so rude.
Oh, we're going to Syracuse. We're going out to the home I grew up in.
Okay, I just need to know where to drive with the salad. That's all. I was just fishing for that information.
I bet you my mom would love this salad. So
everyone would.
I bet you. I'm sure they would. I'm sure they would. I'm sure it's just me. Thank you, as always, for joining me to kick off the week, Maura. I'm very excited about your new theme song and, of course, talking to you next week. Have a great Thanksgiving. Are you going to tell us, is there anything that you're most grateful for this year outside of our weekly conversations?
I was going to say talking to you, actually, but for real, honestly. Now, I will say this with absolute sincerity, Pete. Knowing you, I'm very grateful for that. You have been a fantastic friend this year. And I hope to never talk to you again after this. So I just wanted to say at this point, thank you.
I knew you really subtly were taking this personal that I didn't love your salad. I know you're mad at me right now.
I appreciate the subtle. It's just
I'm sure
overt. There's no subtext here. It's all text.
I'm sure most people listening will be siding with you the same way they did last time this came up when I just got absolutely destroyed by people. So I'm sure that'll be the case now, and I hope that
now I'm grateful for that.
Take it out on Twitter at Behind Your Back and at Pete Dominick's. May the war begin there. Happy Thanksgiving, Maura. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, there she goes, Maura Quint at Behind Your Back. Let her know that you heard her on the show. Always greatly appreciated when you thank us for joining me, as well as Claire Potter at Tenured Radical. And go to the show notes for today and any day to find out more about my guests, of course. Also, leave a review while you're in the podcast app, especially if you're over in the Apple Podcast. If you're not already a subscriber, I ask you, why not? Ask not what you can do for the podcast, but what for the podcast can do for you. And by that, I mean get a paid subscription. Sorry, standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominick. All right, well, it is Monday, and I hope you started your week off right. I appreciate you starting your week with me. If you did, let me know who you'd want to hear on the program. I've got some great guests joining me scheduled for the week, and I really appreciate you listening. And now it's time to go. But before we do, singer-songwriter John Carroll, who just played our song live. You can see I shared it yesterday on Twitter. But here he is right now singing us out, the great John Carroll, with our song. Time to stand up, everybody.
Get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on.